My sense of the way that the Charter of Quebec Values was presented to us was one based on anecdote. I think a lot of the justification that we've heard in the media has been very much anecdotal about particular kinds of isolated incidents. And I think anecdote only takes us so far. I think if we're thinking about the way that culture works, we'd really have to move beyond anecdote, a pure reliance on anecdote, to think more systematically, more structurally about what's going on fundamentally underneath the messages that we've heard. So the way I like to think about culture is it's an informal definition, but it's as a set of stories. It's a set of stories that we tell one another that circulate within culture and that allow us to understand our role in the world and to allow us to understand how we relate to one another and to make meaning in terms of our own lives. Based on that definition of culture, culture being a very complex thing, but that's one informal definition of it, I think it's really important that we think about the kinds of stories that circulate, where those stories come from, who they're addressed to, who's speaking in terms of those kinds of messages, how often we hear them, and what the sum total of those messages is for us as a culture. So if culture is a set of stories, it's also about the power to represent the world around us. And I think it's very, very important that we know, and I'm thinking of theorists such as Stuart Hall and Richard Dyer in this particular instance, that representations of people in the media have profound practical consequences for the way that they're treated in life. So there is a direct relationship between the kinds of cultural stories that circulate and the ways in which people experience their lives, the way they are treated in life, which I think is a very important connection to make when we think about the Charter of Quebec Values.
So we're at a really remarkable moment in Quebec on many fronts, and I think this story speaks to many issues at once. And I want to focus especially on this conception of the whole project of furthering the interests of the neutrality of the state and its public service, and at the same time to enshrine gender equality. And the ways in which this project in particular has focused on what are called in French les signes ostentatoires, conspicuous signs, and the ways that these in particular are constructed as threats to both state neutrality and gender equality.
Issues like the Charter emerge from this strive or this sort of attempt to mobilize sentiments, and one has to ask critically against whom. Who is included in the Charter and who is excluded? What are the conditions or criteria by which one becomes included?
In fact, equality and neutrality protect certain subjects over others, and the Charter's affirmation of our values already presumes who those subjects are.
I think that it's important that we then ask, so what is the work that this proposed charter is supposed to do? If, in fact, there's no imminent concern, if there's no popular record of necessity for, so what exactly, and if it's in the end going to violate the existing rights, which are clear and extensive. What work does it do? Right? Why is this being introduced? Why is this being proposed? And I think that's where you start to get to the kernel of the kind of ideological and political project that the proposed charter has embarked upon.
The Charter was announced in September of 2013, and what it does basically, or what it proposes, is that anyone wearing a religious sign, or an ostentatious religious sign as they've been called or identified, would not be able to work in the public sector. And so this includes, as ostentatious symbols are turbans, hijabs, face veils, kippas, yarmulkes are considered ostentatious signs. And also larger than average crosses. Anything that is considered an acceptable sign would be a cross that is smaller, or a crescent as they've been identified, or a Star of David that is small. So those are kind of the symbols that are acceptable and the symbols that are unacceptable.
It's basically creating a kind of state-sanctioned form of racism as well, just even in the proposed legislation.
We really focused on a cross-section of members of the Communication Studies Department. We looked to professors, we looked to students, and so what you will see is people who come at this from a range of different research perspectives, asking questions about the Charter. And more importantly, asking questions about the discourses around the Charter. It's the fall of 2013, and we can't anticipate exactly where this law will go. But the point is, at this exact time, we can say that it is creating discourses across the province and across the country that have consequences. And it's these consequences that we have tried to unpack and try to contribute questions to.
So when thinking about the movement, or better yet, the Charter, my question is, how are we witnessing this? And I use that term intentionally, witness. How are we witnessing it? Whether we are a Muslim woman, or we're a communication scholar, or we're part of the officials that are determining whether or not this will be passed, this bill. And I think about Stuart Hall and his understanding of popular culture. And he says it's like a field, and there's different players on this field. But in the case of the Charter, I'm not necessarily saying that these players, we need to know whose team they're on, but more so which players are being legitimized to play.
I don't know more immediately, as soon as the Charter became like a public conversation, issued, it was I don't know more Quebec specifically, issued a declaration of like rejecting this Charter and seeing it as an absolutely negative thing, and they were advocating for discourses that don't create othering and that don't create a fear of the other. And so I think, like, again, like emphasizing these positive moments where we can get back to and sort of release this tension that's created by this very polarizing discourse, this very polarizing Charter that supposes that we can't talk. It's like, no, but we can.